January 1920. The streets of New York City were slick with melting snow, reflecting the gray winter sky above. The smell of coal smoke and roasting chestnuts mingled with the sharper tang of gasoline from the city's growing fleet of automobiles. Streetcars clanged along Fifth Avenue, weaving between crowds of men in wool coats and fedoras and women who had recently shortened their hair and embraced new fashions. The echo of church bells mixed with the distant whistle of factory whistles, creating a rhythm that marked both work and devotion. America had survived war and pandemic, yet it now stood on the edge of transformation, a nation eager to redefine its daily life, work, and culture. For ordinary Americans, this winter morning captured the contrast of their lives. Horse-drawn wagons still shared streets with new automobiles. Milkmen delivered glass bottles to doorsteps before dawn, while children trudged through the slush to school in heavy wool coats. In wealthier neighborhoods, electric lights illuminated clean sidewalks and the polished brass of telephones that connected families to a rapidly shrinking world. Even the simplest routines, from breakfast to commuting, were changing, shaped by technology, urbanization, and a growing desire for convenience. Factories across the nation were already humming, their chimneys sending smoke high into the cold sky. Men clocked in for shifts that would last long hours, often in challenging conditions. Women increasingly joined offices as clerks, typists, and teachers, entering the public sphere in numbers unseen in previous generations. The 19th Amendment, ratified just months earlier, had given women the right to vote, signaling not only political change, but a transformation in daily life. Urban streets and rural roads alike were adjusting to the new rhythms of modern America. Education reflected the country's broader ambitions. Public schooling expanded rapidly, particularly in growing cities. The prevailing belief was that a child's progress through school could shape the nation's future. Classrooms were crowded, but optimism was high. Boys and girls learned reading, arithmetic, and history, while progressive educators began emphasizing critical thinking and practical skills. In rural areas, one-room schoolhouses continued to serve multiple age groups under the watchful eye of a single teacher. Despite challenges, literacy rates were climbing, and more Americans could envision opportunities beyond the fields and factories of their youth. Transportation defined movement in ways unprecedented for ordinary Americans. Henry Ford's Model T, mass-produced and increasingly affordable, was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of freedom. By 1920, over 8 million cars navigated the country's roads. Families could now take weekend excursions to neighboring towns, visit relatives, or explore landscapes previously unreachable. The rise of gasoline stations, repair shops, and improved roadways not only supported these journeys, but began to create a culture of mobility that reshaped community life and leisure. Food and domestic life were similarly evolving. Refrigeration was rare outside the wealthiest homes, so most families relied on daily markets and local dairies. Milk came in glass bottles, delivered at dawn. Meat, vegetables, and bread were purchased fresh. Households spent hours on preparation and cleaning, with laundry often involving boiling water and scrub boards. Urban homes sometimes had electric stoves and iceboxes, signaling the gradual spread of modern convenience. Families ate together, with meals reflecting both tradition and the subtle influence of new culinary possibilities brought by immigration and city markets. Entertainment offered Americans a glimpse into new cultural horizons. Silent movies were an emerging form of mass amusement, and radio was just beginning to transmit voices and music across states. Communities gathered to watch films, listen to live music, or attend local theater. Jazz, born in New Orleans and spreading through northern cities, was reshaping American music. Its improvisational energy reflected broader social changes, loosened norms, increased mobility, and the blending of cultures in rapidly growing urban centers. The excitement of innovation coexisted with the persistence of older forms of leisure, from church socials to barn dances. Daily work continued to define structure and meaning in Americans' lives. Factories and offices demanded punctuality, discipline, and endurance. Labor unions fought to secure better wages and working conditions, particularly in heavy industry and textiles. Rural laborers faced seasonal cycles, relying on horses, plows, and manual skill, though mechanization was gradually transforming agriculture. While urban and rural life were increasingly distinct, both shared a commitment to productivity, community, and self-improvement that characterized early 20th century America. The early 1920s were a time when America was redefining itself. In urban centers, department stores became temples of consumerism, filled with clothing, furniture, and tools that promised a better life. Window displays drew crowds of children and adults alike, showcasing products that were becoming symbols of modern comfort. Advertising, still in its infancy, began to influence not just what people bought, but how they imagined their lives. Printed ads, billboards, and eventually radio jingles created a shared cultural experience across the nation. Even in rural areas, farmers watched and listened, understanding that the city's innovations were reshaping the economy and the imagination. The decade was also defined by profound changes in social life. Women, who had recently gained the right to vote, were asserting new independence. Shortened skirts, bobbed hair, and looser clothing reflected their evolving roles. Women entered offices, banks, and teaching positions, and began participating in civic life in ways unimaginable a generation earlier. The presence of women in public spaces, along with the rise of youth culture, challenged traditional norms. Young people frequented dance halls, soda fountains, and movie theaters, exploring freedom that had been largely inaccessible to previous generations. The contrast between urban and rural America became increasingly stark. In cities, skyscrapers and electric lighting symbolized progress, while rural towns remained tethered to seasonal rhythms. Farmers rose before dawn, working fields with horses or early tractors, relying on careful planning and physical endurance. Local churches, schools, and markets maintained the community structure that had sustained rural life for generations. Meanwhile, urbanites navigated crowded streets, subway systems, and busy workplaces. This divide shaped politics, social attitudes, and cultural perceptions throughout the decade, influencing debates over morality, modernization, and governance. Education was at the heart of America's self-transformation. Public high schools were becoming more common in cities, reflecting the belief that education could prepare citizens not only for work, but for life in a modern democracy. Textbooks emphasized arithmetic, literature, civics, and history, instilling a sense of shared national identity. Progressive educational thinkers encouraged critical thinking and practical knowledge, preparing students for careers in a changing economy. Rural schools, often single-room buildings, continued to teach basics to children of multiple ages, but the influence of progressive teaching slowly spread, connecting even the most remote communities to the larger national vision. The workplace in the 1920s reflected both opportunity and challenge. Factories churned out cars, household appliances, and mass-produced goods, creating employment for millions. Office work expanded as business processes grew more complex, with typewriters, telephones, and clerical staff becoming essential components of efficiency. Despite growth, wages varied widely, and labor strikes highlighted tensions between workers and management. Immigrant and African American laborers often faced discrimination, earning less and facing harsher conditions. Yet, the decade offered hope. For many, stable employment meant the ability to afford a modest home, a car, and a measure of leisure previously unimaginable. Technology transformed daily routines at home and work. Radios began to carry voices and music across the nation, knitting together urban and rural communities. By mid-decade, millions of households owned radios, tuning in to hear news, music, and presidential addresses. Telephones became more common, connecting homes across neighborhoods and towns. Even small conveniences, such as electric irons, washing machines, and vacuum cleaners, began to enter homes, reducing labor and allowing families more time for leisure or education. These inventions were more than convenience. They were markers of modernity, signaling a cultural shift toward efficiency, comfort, and connectivity. Transportation reshaped mobility and social life. Automobiles were no longer a luxury for the elite. They became a tool of freedom for middle-class families. Improved road networks and service stations supported increased travel. Taxis, streetcars, and subways created fluid urban transit systems, allowing workers to live farther from their workplaces. Rural Americans, too, benefited as trucks and buses carried goods and people across previously impassable distances. Transportation connected communities, reshaped trade, and enabled a culture of exploration and leisure, fostering experiences that extended beyond daily work and chores. Prohibition, which began in January 1920 under the 18th Amendment, transformed American society in unexpected ways. While the law aimed to reduce crime and promote morality, it instead fueled illicit activity. Speakeasies flourished in cities, and bootlegging became an organized enterprise. Gangsters such as Al Capone built criminal empires, exploiting the public's continued desire for alcohol. Yet, Prohibition also reflected cultural tensions. The conflict between rural, religious America and urban, secular America, between tradition and modernity. It highlighted the challenges of legislating morality in a nation rapidly embracing new freedoms. Cultural life expanded in remarkable ways. Jazz music became the soundtrack of cities, bringing energy, improvisation, and new rhythms to Americans of all backgrounds. The Harlem Renaissance gave voice to African American artists, writers, and musicians, transforming the cultural landscape and challenging stereotypes. Theater, literature, and cinema flourished, creating national icons and shared experiences. Silent films dominated the first half of the decade, captivating audiences in grand theaters, while urban audiences increasingly had access to orchestral concerts, poetry readings, and local festivals. This cultural vibrancy reflected both technological innovation and the blending of diverse traditions. Foodways reflected both tradition and modernity. Most households still relied on fresh, local produce, delivered daily or grown in personal gardens. Milk bottles, fresh bread, and seasonal vegetables were staples of the American diet. Urban stores offered canned goods, packaged products, and emerging convenience items, giving families a sense of abundance. Meals remained central to family life, reinforcing social bonds and cultural norms. Dining out, while not yet common for the working class, gained popularity in cafes, diners, and emerging chain restaurants, reflecting both changing social structures and increasing mobility. Health and medicine progressed, influenced by the recent trauma of the Spanish flu. Hospitals modernized, sanitation improved, and physicians increasingly relied on scientific methods rather than tradition. Rural healthcare lagged behind, but gradual improvements reached smaller communities through traveling doctors and nurses. Life expectancy was rising, and public health campaigns addressed hygiene, nutrition, and vaccination. Despite progress, challenges remained. Infant mortality was still high, and chronic diseases persisted in both urban and rural areas. Religion remained central to many communities, guiding social behavior, education, and daily rituals. Evangelical revivals, church socials, and Sunday services structured life, particularly in rural towns. At the same time, debates between science and faith intensified, as evidenced by the Scopes trial of 1925. These cultural clashes highlighted the tension between modernization and tradition, a defining feature of the decade. Communities navigated these divides, balancing moral guidance with the allure of new ideas, technologies, and freedoms. Leisure, previously limited by long workdays and rural isolation, expanded in the 1920s. Baseball became a national pastime, with stadiums filling weekend afternoons. Public parks, theaters, and emerging amusement parks offered escapes from daily routines. Dance halls and jazz clubs reflected urban vibrancy, while small-town fairs maintained traditional social gatherings. Youth culture grew, fueled by music, films, and a newfound sense of independence. Young people began to challenge the strict codes of their parents' generation, testing boundaries while redefining the rhythm of everyday life. Housing reflected social status, technology, and urbanization. In cities, apartment buildings and row houses accommodated growing populations, while electricity and indoor plumbing gradually became standard. Rural homes remained simpler, often relying on wood stoves, wells, and outdoor privies. Yet modernization touched even remote areas. Small appliances, radios, and automobiles slowly reshaped domestic life. Family structure remained central, with multiple generations often living together and sharing responsibilities, balancing tradition with the gradual adoption of modern comforts. By the mid-1920s, America was living the contradictions of modernity. Cities were bustling, full of skyscrapers, electric lights, and the constant hum of automobiles. Streets overflowed with people eager to explore new forms of entertainment, while factories, offices, and workshops ran at full speed to meet rising consumer demand. Yet beyond the urban centers, rural life continued much as it had for decades, dictated by seasonal cycles and local customs. Farmers still relied on plows and early tractors, tending crops that fed the nation while navigating falling prices and increasing debt. The contrast between urban energy and rural persistence defined the decade's social and economic landscape. Cultural expression flourished, often in response to the tensions of modern life. Jazz music, now popular across the country, became both a soundtrack and symbol of the era. In Harlem, African-American writers, poets, and musicians created a renaissance of creativity that challenged stereotypes and celebrated cultural identity. Figures like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston shaped a literary and artistic movement that resonated far beyond the neighborhood. In cities nationwide, people listened to jazz on the radio, attended theater performances, or visited silent movie palaces, experiencing a shared national culture that crossed class and regional boundaries. The influence of women grew steadily during these years. Following the passage of the 19th Amendment, women not only exercised political power, but increasingly participated in public life and the workforce. Clerical work, teaching, and retail offered new opportunities, and higher education enrollments among women steadily increased. Socially, flappers epitomized a generational shift. Shorter hair, shorter skirts, and public dancing challenged long-standing norms. While flappers were largely an urban phenomenon, the broader trend reflected a nation grappling with the role of women in modern society. Rural communities held to more traditional expectations, creating a tension between progress and continuity. Immigration reshaped American demographics, especially in urban centers. Millions arrived from Eastern and Southern Europe, bringing languages, customs, and religions that contributed to vibrant neighborhood cultures. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston became mosaics of ethnic communities, each maintaining cultural traditions while integrating into the national economy. At the same time, anti-immigrant sentiment grew, codified in the Immigration Act of 1924, which imposed quotas and reflected the anxieties of native-born Americans. The decade thus combined the excitement of diversity with the challenges of nativism, shaping social and political discourse. Racial tensions persisted even as African-American culture flourished. The Great Migration continued, bringing hundreds of thousands of black families from the South to northern industrial cities. Employment opportunities were uneven, and segregation remained a reality in housing, education, and public life. Despite these challenges, black communities achieved remarkable cultural visibility through music, literature, and visual arts. Harlem became the epicenter of this cultural movement, drawing attention to the creativity, resilience, and social contributions of African Americans during a period of systemic inequality. The economy, for many, seemed boundless. Stock markets climbed steadily, fueled by speculation, consumer demand, and easy credit. Installment plans allowed ordinary Americans to purchase cars, appliances, and radios, creating a consumer culture that defined urban life. Factories produced goods at an unprecedented scale, and businesses advertised aggressively, shaping desires as much as necessities. Yet beneath the surface, inequality persisted. Farmers struggled with low crop prices, industrial laborers faced wage stagnation, and regional disparities remained stark. The economic optimism of the cities masked vulnerabilities that would later emerge in the Great Depression. Education continued its evolution, reflecting both optimism and ambition. Public high schools expanded, preparing students for careers in business, science, and industry. Curriculums emphasized literacy, mathematics, civics, and increasingly, vocational skills. Higher education grew as well, with colleges and universities fostering intellectual, scientific, and artistic achievement. Extracurricular activities, such as sports, debate clubs, and campus publications, cultivated social skills and cultural literacy. Education became a tool not only for economic advancement, but for shaping informed citizens, connecting everyday life to the broader progress of the nation. Leisure and entertainment shaped daily experience in powerful ways. Baseball stadiums filled with cheering crowds, providing communal excitement and civic pride. Dance halls, jazz clubs, and movie theaters offered urbanites opportunities to escape work and social constraints. The silent film industry dominated the early decade, while talkies emerged in the late 1920s, transforming cinema forever. Radio broadcasts connected urban and rural communities alike, transmitting news, music, and entertainment into homes across the country. These shared experiences fostered a sense of national identity, even as regional and class differences remained pronounced. Transportation continued to redefine mobility. Automobiles became a staple of middle-class life, creating new opportunities for work, travel, and leisure. Improved highways and roads facilitated regional travel, while buses, trolleys, and subways allowed dense urban populations to commute efficiently. Trucks transformed commerce, enabling goods to move farther and faster than ever before. Travel also brought Americans into contact with new ideas, cultures, and landscapes, gradually expanding perspectives beyond hometown confines. This mobility reshaped society, connecting labor, commerce, and leisure in unprecedented ways. Prohibition, though intended to improve morality, continued to shape urban life dramatically. Speakeasies, hidden behind unmarked doors, became centers of social life and defiance. Bootleggers profited from widespread demand, and organized crime grew into a powerful force in cities like Chicago. The law's failure to curb alcohol consumption highlighted the tension between legislative intent and human behavior. For many, prohibition was less about morality and more about social identity, reinforcing the divide between urban modernity and rural conservatism. Housing and urban planning reflected the rapid growth of cities. Tenements and apartment buildings accommodated swelling populations, while suburbs began to emerge for those seeking space, comfort, and a sense of community. Electricity, indoor plumbing, and heating systems gradually became standard, although disparities remained. Urban design reflected social hierarchies, with wealthier districts enjoying amenities absent in working-class neighborhoods. In rural areas, homes remained simpler, often reliant on wood stoves, wells, and outdoor privies. But even these households gradually absorbed elements of modern convenience as electricity and appliances spread. Fashion, like other cultural markers, mirrored social transformation. Women's clothing grew more practical and expressive, reflecting independence and mobility. Men adopted slimmer, more comfortable suits, embracing both style and function. These trends were widely visible in urban centers, while rural areas retained conservative dress standards. Fashion served as both a personal statement and a social indicator, illustrating broader cultural changes and the tension between tradition and progress. By the late 1920s, technological innovation had touched nearly every aspect of life. Radios, telephones, electric lights, and household appliances connected Americans to one another and to the wider world. Mail-order catalogs enabled families to purchase goods from across the country, while newspapers and magazines shaped public discourse. Education, commerce, and leisure increasingly relied on technology, reflecting the growing pace of modern life. Yet these changes also highlighted disparities, as wealthier households adopted new tools faster than working-class and rural homes. Politics remained conservative, emphasizing business growth and limited government intervention. Presidents Harding and Coolidge oversaw policies that favored industrial expansion and minimal regulation. While cities thrived under this approach, rural communities faced challenges, particularly in agriculture, where falling prices and debt created hardship. Political discourse increasingly reflected the divide between urban modernity and rural traditionalism, a divide that informed debates over social policy, education, immigration, and civil rights. Immigration continued to influence society while facing restriction. The 1924 Immigration Act imposed quotas limiting arrivals from Southern and Eastern Europe, reflecting nativist concerns about labor, culture, and assimilation. Immigrant communities continued to thrive in cities, maintaining cultural traditions while integrating into American economic life. These communities contributed to music, cuisine, art, and commerce, leaving a lasting imprint on urban culture and shaping the nation's identity. Race relations remained complex and often tense. Segregation persisted, particularly in the South, while discrimination limited opportunities in urban centers. Yet African Americans increasingly participated in industrial labor, cultural production, and urban civic life. The Harlem Renaissance symbolized both resistance and achievement, showcasing literature, music, and art that reshaped perceptions of Black life. These cultural contributions were intertwined with struggles for equality, highlighting both progress and the enduring barriers to full social inclusion. Economic growth, consumerism, and speculation carried the nation toward instability. Easy credit, installment plans, and rising stock market participation created the illusion of endless prosperity. Factories produced goods at an unprecedented scale, and urban populations enjoyed new conveniences and leisure opportunities. Yet beneath this surface, systemic vulnerabilities persisted. Farmers struggled with debt, industrial wages stagnated, and regional disparities remained stark. The optimism of the late 1920s masked an economy increasingly fragile to shocks, a fragility that would soon manifest catastrophically. As the decade drew to a close, daily life reflected both continuity and change. Families maintained routines of work, school, meals, and worship, yet these routines were increasingly shaped by urbanization, technology, and cultural innovation. Children attended schools emphasizing literacy, citizenship, and vocational skills. Women balanced domestic responsibilities with emerging public roles. Entertainment, travel, and consumer goods redefined leisure. For millions, life felt modern, dynamic, and full of possibility, even as underlying tensions foreshadowed the hardships to come. By 1930, the United States had emerged as a modern, industrial, and cultural power, yet the decade's contradictions were clear. Urban and rural divides persisted, inequality remained, and rapid change created both excitement and anxiety. The technological, cultural, and social innovations of the 1920s had transformed daily life in profound ways, reshaping education, work, entertainment, and domestic routines. Americans had experienced a period of unprecedented mobility, creativity, and freedom, a period that would be remembered as both golden and fragile. The early 20th century, particularly the 1920s, established foundations that continue to influence modern America. The expansion of education, the rise of mass media, the transformation of labor, and the redefinition of social roles set patterns that shaped the nation for decades. For contemporary observers, looking back at this decade offers insight into both the potential and the challenges of rapid societal change. It was a time of innovation, aspiration, and complexity, a time when the American identity was being reimagined on a daily basis, in homes, schools, factories, and streets across the nation. The story of life in 1920s America is thus one of balance. Between tradition and innovation, rural and urban, prosperity and vulnerability, freedom and regulation. Every element of daily existence, from the foods people ate to the cars they drove, the schools they attended to the music they danced to, reflects a nation negotiating its place in the modern world. These 10 years, vibrant, complex, and transformative, laid the groundwork for the challenges and triumphs of the decades that followed, leaving an enduring legacy in the fabric of American life.